Hello and welcome to the Study Files. This is the podcast series run by Lancaster University's Learning Development team. Each episode we focus on a specific study skill or area of academic skills, and today we're focusing on report writing. This is part 2 of a 2-part special podcast on report writing, so if you haven't listened to part 1, please have a listen to that first. My name is Sarah. I'm a learning developer here at Lancaster, working mostly in the management school and supporting students with areas of their academic skills, especially academic writing. And today I'm joined again by one of our writing mentors, Rafael. Rafael, do you want to briefly introduce yourself again?
Sure. Hello, guys. Thank you, Sarah, for having me. And hello to everyone in the audience who's hearing this podcast. So I am Rafael, one of the writing mentors. I am currently a 4th-year master's student, and I am studying data science. And I have also graduated from Lancaster doing a bachelor's in analytics.
Thank you. And just to add, Rafael is also a writing mentor for learning development. So every week you support students in the management school with all kinds of assignments, don't you? But particularly with report writing.
Indeed,
well.
We do see them a lot.
So in the first podcast, we talked a lot about strategies for success. And Rafael, you shared things that have really worked for you and ideas and recommendations. But I thought we could start this second podcast thinking about, if you look back on all of the reports that you've written, if you can see any areas where you've really improved and things that were perhaps weaknesses in some of your earlier reports.
Yes, of course. So I would say that as a start, I had a lack of a proper limitations section. So if you watched the podcast from the episode 1, we explained the structure of the reports, and we did a lot of emphasis on having a limitations section. Usually a lot of people leave it to the end of the project, which is usually something that comes after the main body and after the recommendations. And people just think of it this way. It's the limitations. It's one of the last sections. I'm just going to write 2 things and then I'm going to leave it. But I would say that this is a wrong way of approaching the limitation section. And this is something that I'm guilty of having done in the past. I would say that you do need to make every single section of the report count. And having a limitation section explaining that you acknowledge the fact that you have certain limitations to your project shows the examiner that you are able to critically reflect upon your experience. So I would say that it's very important. You mentioned that.
Yeah, and I would just add that, sometimes we support students who are either writing reports or sometimes we see it with dissertations as well, I think, who are reluctant to write about limitations because they think it's going to expose weaknesses in either their whole report or how they've written it. And they're worried that this is going to make something apparent that someone wouldn't have noticed before. Or that, if they're fighting the word limit, that it feels like they're adding something negative about their work. But I think, as you said, it's a real opportunity to demonstrate how you can critically review and analyze your own approach.
Definitely, yeah. A lot of people think that as well, that if they have a limitations, they are just saying that the report could have been better, but it isn't. So it's important to have that. As well, moving on from the limitations, I would say that another error that I have committed in the past is to be too descriptive. And I think that this is an issue that I see in the writing zone quite a lot, and I have been having that problem in the past as well. So what's an example of being too descriptive? Usually when people present numbers, and they say that a number increased or decreased, but they just say, as you can see here, the number decreased from last year, and then they stop the paragraph. But it's actually where the most marks of your report, they will be when you explain why did numbers decrease, why did they increase, or for example, when you are writing about what methodology you plan to use, usually people just describe what the methodology does. The teacher already knows what the methodology does, but they want to see why are you using that methodology. Always asking your question throughout the report of why am I doing this? Why am I saying this? I think that's something that can help you be more critical and actually argument and explain why you're doing something.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those, Rafael. And interesting to hear how you've grown as a report writer there, I think. And I mean, what you just said there very much resonates with, well, a particular insight from literature that I think I can bring in here. So this is from a book called Essentials of Assessment Report Writing by someone called Lichtenberger from 2004. And they talked about how sometimes report writers focus too much on that presentation of data and not dedicating time to saying what that data means, particularly what it means to the target audience of the report. Yeah, so who it's been written for. And that relates back to something you said in podcast 1 about really understanding the brief. Yeah, so taking the time to understand what you've been asked to do and who that report is aimed at. And sometimes that's quite apparent if something is labelled as a client or company report, that's clearer. Other times it's perhaps not so clear as to exactly who you're writing for. And I think that leads us on quite nicely to the next question, Rafael, which is, do you think that reports differ from essays? And if so, how? And do you think that there are differences in things like language choice and style?
Definitely. I do think that there is a difference, and sometimes making that difference is something that helps students come up with being more confident on writing reports or not. So first off, I would say that reports by themselves, they are more action-oriented documents because, as you said, sometimes it's ambiguous on the coursework guideline, but most of the time, the ones that I've seen, they are always telling you who would be the end client of your report. So in that case, you are designing a report for decision-making and for recommendations. And on the other hand, I would say that essays most of the time are about exploring ideas, developing arguments, and the aim is for the student to show the critical thinking without necessarily leading to a recommendation or an action. For example, most essays usually start by saying, evaluate the impact of, etc. And here you're not asked to give an action or a recommendation. You are just asked to explore how this, for example, topic that you're asked about, how it has positives, negatives, etc. But you're not asked to give a final recommendation most of the time. I would say that then moving on to the language that we use in reports, it's much more direct and concise. We are just aiming to say, okay, we carried out the analysis here. Why did we carry it here? It was because of this. We found from the analysis these numbers. What do they mean? They mean this. That's pretty concise. It's just telling the reader, hey, we did this, and this means for our company that we need to do the following. However, on the essays, the language is much more exploratory. You can have more of an authorial voice, you can say, because you are the one that has to explore the ideas, has to explore the sources, so you can explain more about that. And then, of course, the structure, as we mentioned on the first part of the report of the podcast. We do have executive summaries on the reports. We have recommendation and limitation sections, while on the essays, this is something that we usually do not see.
Okay, thank you. And again, I think what you said there resonates with an insight from the literature. So again, we have a text on writing reports by Bowden from 2008. And they really put an emphasis on what they call the benefits of simplicity in writing reports. So that's in expressing key information, conclusions, recommendations, as you said, in simple language and sentences. And that book in particular has practical ideas for how you can write in a simple but persuasive way. So, for example, constructing sentences in the positive. So things like writing what we recommend rather than what we do not recommend, for example. And it has quite a lot of practical ideas for how you can sharpen those sentences. while keeping things simple and clear. I just wonder, Rafael, you touched on recommendations there. Do you have any thoughts about how you write a really kind of punchy, effective recommendation?
Sure. So usually I would have my own section for recommendations, and then I would say, from what we explored on the report so far, we can see that, for example, usually sales in June for a beer company, for example, they increase quite a lot here in England. And then you could say this was explored before because it's usually because of the summer weather, people go out, they consume more. And then your recommendation could be, based on this, the company could increase their stock or their supply to be ready for that increased demand. For example, that's very briefly, of course, what I would say.
Great. Yeah. So again, concise.
Yeah.
Evidence-based as well there. So drawing together what you present in the report to kind of frame the recommendation, and then specific and applicable.
Yeah. Definitely.
So it's something that the target audience, the client, can actually put into practice.
Of course. Yeah. And I used the beer example because, as a matter of fact, I had to do a project on a brewery last term, so it was quite fresh on my mind.
Excellent. Yeah. And did very well, I think, as well.
We did, yes. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for that, Rafael. We've had a bit of a chat about some of the differences and kind of distinctions between essay and report writing. But I think, as you know, at the academic writing zone, yes, we do see these traditional reports, but sometimes we also see things that are perhaps a little bit more framed as an essay, but perhaps seem to have a structure of a report, for example. And I wondered whether you think there are sometimes tensions between traditional, let's say, company reports and those that expect a bit more academic rigor and perhaps some qualities that are a bit like essay writing.
Yes, definitely. I would say that, again, here your best friend is the coursework brief. And it will tell you what spectrum to land upon, on the company report spectrum or on the academic report spectrum. Usually, if it's a company report, they will explicitly say this end user of your report will be an executive from Apple, the company. So that by itself, it already gives you a very clear scope. You're only doing your analysis for Apple, the company, and for all of that. So here you can prioritize actionable insights over theoretical depth. So they don't really care much about why you used a certain methodology. They just want to see if it works, what you did. Page limits, usually companies will not tell you, hey, we just want this in 10 pages, but they will expect you to make it really brief because they will prefer to be efficient and read over it really quickly. And then, of course, on the other hand, for the academic reports, usually they are much more extensive. They want you to talk a lot about literature. So all of the sources that you have looked into, if you read a lot of academic journals before writing your report, usually they like to see that you cite them because it shows that you looked into other literature before doing the report. The citation standards are much more rigorous in an academic report. They want you to use Harvard referencing, for example, and they want you to adequately, let's say, cite the literature that you are getting all of this information from, while a company, on the other hand, they don't really care much about what literature specifically you got a certain methodology from. And finally, as for the page limits on academic reports, I would say that here they are really explicit on how many pages they want you to put. And usually if you go over this limit, you might risk of losing marks.
Thank you. And I think it's important for us to talk about that, because part of what we do in learning development is to try and support students learning about expectations of different assignment genres, sometimes which are very particular to certain disciplines and to study in the UK. And I hope in these two podcasts we have talked about features of reports and kind of talked about some of the differences with essays. But I also wanted to make clear, sometimes there are assignments that straddle the two, are kind of like hybrid essay reports. And that can be challenging to navigate. But just like you said, Rafael, take time to read that assignment brief. If in doubt, talk to your module lead or program director. And often, those people, they would like to support you, but it might be that they're quite happy for you to choose a structure to develop your own sections, so long as it's done with purpose and reasoning. So yes, we have traditional reports and we have essays, but we also have a bit of a grey area in between as well. Yeah. So moving on to one of our last questions, Rafael. I often get asked by students about appendices. And I thought, do you have any experience of these, and how do you decide what to include?
Yeah. I would say that appendices are really tricky because most of the time students as well have a hard time on knowing, should I include this image on the appendix or on my main body? I always have a rule of thumb, and I would say that if it's something that is critical for your analysis, if it's a graph that you need to show that is critical for your analysis, please include it on the main body. However, if it's something that is very, very, let's say, broad or perhaps something that is not something very critical to your analysis that you're making on the main body, then I would just place it on the appendix. Usually good candidates for the appendix can be raw data sets, detailed calculations, or extended tables.
So things that might interrupt the flow of the report because they're pretty big in size.
Definitely. Yeah. And also most reports, as you said, Sarah, last episode, they mainly have a page limit. It's not a word limit. So it's really tricky because if you include a lot of images, perhaps one image can already remove 10 sentences worth of space on your report. And that is quite a lot of information that you can include. So definitely I would be very cautious with what I put on the appendix. Also, a lot of students usually think that the appendix is just like a warehouse where they can throw everything.
Bit of a dumping ground.
Definitely, yeah. So it's very tricky. I would say that, think of it this way. The appendix is the place where, when the lecturer is reviewing your report, and if they say, where did this student get this data from? Or how did they get it from? They can go and look at this evidence in the appendix. And then, of course, finally, and of course, I think it's quite important to keep in mind that you want to format the appendix correctly. So if you include figures, at least just put, this is figure, 10, and then just put a title on it. If you're including graphs, make them look neat. For example, label the axis, give it a title, etc. So again, it's the appendix. Maybe it's not going to have a massive impact on your grade, but every little aspect that you can add upon will help you get a better grade on your report.
Great. So just a reminder there that anything in the appendix still has to have the same kind of attention paid to it in terms of titles, references, etc. Yeah. I would just add to that sometimes students ask me, let's say if they've used a framework or model to analyse something in a report, and that model is quite readily available, whether they should include a full representation of that in the appendix. And I would say, if it's something that you can find very easily and you've already given a good reference for it in the main body, I don't think you need to reproduce it. If you've added any notes to a model that shows your application of it, then perhaps that should go in an appendix because that's specific and unique to your workings out. But I don't feel that readily available information that's quite broad, doesn't specifically relate to your report, to your task, needs to be included in an appendix.
Definitely. And again, as well, please verify with the teacher if the appendix will count towards your page limit or it won't.
Great advice there, thank you. And Rafael, so my final question today is that if there are any students out there now, perhaps struggling with planning or writing a report, what would you say to them?
So first off, before reading the report, and starts in work on it, I would say start as early as you can. If you've got a lot of time, don't think that, oh, okay, it's due in 3 months. I'm not going to do anything for the first 2 months. I think it's important you start slow, but you do progressive steps every single week. After that, I would start with the brief. Read it multiple times, explain in your own words what's being asked. If you're having a tough time with this, break it into manageable chunks, something that you can understand slightly better. And then, of course, try to come up with your own analysis. And keep in mind, the analysis does not need to be groundbreaking. As long as it's clear, accurate, and concise, those interpretations will be often preferable by the lecturer. Also, this is not sponsored, by the way, but if you want to seek feedback early, you can come to the academic writing zone, or you can also ask the supervisor if they are happy to do so, or any friends. I would say not friends from your course, but friends from outside your course, because if they can understand what you wrote, that's a really good sign for you. So focus on clarity over the complexity of your report. If the reader understands your findings, I would say you've done a really good job.
Thank you very much. And thanks for sharing so many insights and of your experiences there, Rafael. So just like Rafael said, if you are writing a report and would like help, you can request an appointment with a faculty writing mentor, just like Rafael. They can go over a plan or draft with you. They can also look at a submitted report, which you've got feedback on, and talk about that. And we really do aim to provide friendly and informed feedback for you to move forward. So thank you for listening today, and please do look out for more podcasts from the Study Files. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye.